Society has this incredibly weird obsession with the postpartum bounce back. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, it's everywhere.
Right. You see it literally everywhere.
Yeah.
A celebrity is on a magazine cover, maybe 6 weeks after giving birth, looking like nothing ever happened. And there's this unspoken expectation that your body is just supposed to snap right back to its original factory settings.
Yeah, it's treated like a rubber band. You stretch it out, you release the tension, and it just snaps back into place immediately.
Which is just such a frustrating standard. So today, we are tearing that narrative completely down.
I am very glad we're doing this.
Because when you dive into the actual medical reality, the postpartum body isn't snapping back at all. It is navigating this massive, wildly complex cellular reconstruction project. And it's doing this while fighting a severe hormonal headwind that lasts long after the baby is actually here.
It really is a profound physiological shift. And to understand what's actually happening, we've pulled together a massive stack of sources for this deep dive. We're looking at clinical trial data, physical therapy guidelines, and recent medical research.
And the mission here is to decode why the postpartum body feels so remarkably different.
Exactly. And the central question we are exploring today, which frankly rarely gets talked about in standard postnatal care, is whether postnatal hormone shifts can actually affect collagen repair.
Spoiler alert for the listener, they absolutely do. Collagen and hormones are the secret protagonists of this entire recovery story. So let's frame this with an analogy right out of the gate.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about postpartum recovery like this. It's like being asked to completely rebuild the foundation of a house, but the supply chain for bricks and mortar has been completely shut down.
Well, that is good. That supply chain disruption is the perfect way to visualize it, because to understand why that supply chain gets shut down, we have to rewind a bit.
Right, back to the pregnancy.
Yeah, we have to look at the massive hormonal tug-of-war happening during pregnancy and then right after birth.
So let's start with pregnancy. What is happening to the foundation before the baby even arrives? Because, the body doesn't just wait until birth to start changing the architecture, right?
Not at all. During pregnancy, your body produces a hormone called relaxin.
Which sounds very chill.
Right. It does exactly what it sounds like. It relaxes things. Relaxin peaks to loosen your ligaments and prepare the rigid structure of the pelvis for childbirth. But the mechanism behind how it does this is what's really fascinating.
Okay, lay it on me.
It achieves this looseness by increasing the activity of something called matrix metalloproteinases, or MMPs.
Okay, MMPs.
Yeah.
Let's unpack what those actually do to the tissue, because that sounds intense.
Think of MMPs as molecular scissors.
Molecular scissors, okay.
Yeah, they are enzymes that actively degrade and break down collagen. So during pregnancy, thanks to relaxin just flooding your system, these MMPs are snipping away at your structural proteins. Your joints feel loose, your tendon stiffness drops, and your connective tissues become highly compliant.
Which makes total sense from an engineering standpoint, right? You need the pelvis to widen and flex so a baby can literally pass through. It's brilliant for childbirth, but it leaves the structural integrity of the pelvic floor intentionally weakened. Like the house has been purposefully loosened up.
Exactly. Then childbirth happens, the baby is out, and you would naturally assume the body would immediately switch gears, pack up the molecular scissors, and start tightening everything back up by bringing in all that new collagen.
But reading through the sources, the biological reality takes a hard left turn here.
A very hard left.
Because after birth, a hormone called prolactin spikes. And prolactin is the driver for breast milk production. It is absolutely essential for feeding the newborn.
Right, it's critical.
But I realized, looking at the data, this massive spike in prolactin comes at a really steep cost. It severely suppresses your ovarian production of two other critical hormones, estrogen and testosterone.
And that suppression isn't subtle. It plunges the body into a profoundly low estrogen state.
Wait, let me stop and look at the actual function of estrogen here, because the medical journals in our sources are very clear about what estrogen does for a woman's body.
It's vital.
Estrogen is the critical architect for connective tissue. It maintains vaginal wall thickness, it synthesizes type I and type 3 collagen, and it provides elasticity.
Yes, exactly.
So the exact hormone keeping the baby fed prolactin is actively suppressing the exact hormone the mother needs to heal her own tissues. Estrogen, that feels like a massive biological design flaw.
I know, it seems entirely counterintuitive, right? Why would the body starve itself of the very tool it needs to heal from a major trauma?
It makes no sense.
Well, evolution is ruthless. It prioritizes the survival of the infant over the immediate recovery of the mother. As long as lactation continues, the body decides that feeding the baby is mission critical. So prolactin stays high and estrogen stays suppressed. The medical literature actually has a specific clinical term for this state. They call it genitourinary syndrome of lactation, or GSL.
GSL. What does that actually look like for the person experiencing it?
Well, because of this prolonged estrogen drop, lactating women enter a physiological state that heavily mimics menopause.
Menopause, really?
Yes, the tissues become visibly thinner, drier, and lose their stretch. The clinical data shows that between 17% and 46% of lactating women report significant vaginal dryness, localized discomfort, and a persistently weakened pelvic floor.
So the systemic estrogen is low. But I want to zoom in on the actual mechanics of healing here. If we move from the macro-level hormone circulating in the blood to the micro-level cellular reality, how does this estrogen drop physically stop a birth injury from healing properly?
To see that, we really have to look at how human tissue responds to trauma. Childbirth triggers an acute inflammatory response.
Right.
The moment the tissue is stretched or torn, your body releases a massive burst of inflammatory cytokines, like IL-1 beta and IL-6. Think of these as the immune system's first responders rushing to a crash site.
And usually, inflammation gets a bad rap. But in this specific context, those first responders are necessary, right?
Absolutely. In a spontaneous vaginal delivery, this early inflammation clears away damaged cells and debris. It secures the area, and typically within a few days, those inflammatory alarms shut off.
And then what happens?
The body shifts over to sending reparative signals like TGF-beta, which basically tell the local cells, okay, the site is clear, start pouring the new concrete.
But looking at the clinical data, that transition from alarm to rebuild doesn't always go smoothly. It seems to depend heavily on how you deliver the baby.
Yeah, the differences between delivery modes are stark. Let's look at instrumental deliveries, when forceps or a vacuum are used.
Right.
Those interventions cause much greater mechanical trauma to the tissue. Because the trauma is so severe, the local alarms just keep blaring.
So the inflammation doesn't stop.
Exactly. The tissue stays trapped in a destructive inflammatory phase for much longer. That prolonged inflammation delays organized healing, which often leads to excessive scarring or permanently weakened pelvic supports.
Okay, so too much trauma keeps the alarm blaring. But what if we go to the exact opposite end of the spectrum? Because a lot of people might assume an elective C-section protects the pelvic floor completely, since the baby doesn't pass through the birth canal at all.
Right, but it's far more complicated than a simple protection. An elective C-section, specifically one performed before labor even begins, bypasses the mechanical stretch of the vaginal tissue entirely.
Right.
Because there is no local tissue trauma in the birth canal, those inflammatory first responders never get called to the site.
Which sounds ideal, right?
Yeah.
No trauma, no inflammation.
It sounds ideal until you realize that inflammation is the trigger that starts the repair process.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Without that initial mucosal stretch and the subsequent inflammatory signaling, the early reparative signals within the vaginal niche are severely blunted. The tissue doesn't get the necessary chemical instructions to remodel and strengthen its structural matrix.
Damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
An instrumental delivery causes too much inflammation, stalling the rebuild.
Mm.
An elective C-section causes too little local signaling, so the rebuild never gets authorized in the first place.
Exactly.
And hovering over all of this mechanical chaos is the estrogen problem.
And the estrogen problem is actually twofold. It is not just a lack of estrogen floating around in your bloodstream. The local tissue receivers themselves, the receptors sitting on the outside of the cells, get completely thrown out of whack.
What do you mean?
Researchers call this a receptor ratio crisis.
Break that down for me. What does a receptor ratio of crisis actually mean for the cells that are trying to heal?
Well, you have different types of estrogen receptors in your tissues. They are like different types of walkie-talkies, and they need to be in a very specific balance to maintain healthy connective tissue. Okay.
The sources show that in women with pelvic organ prolapse, this ratio is severely disrupted. Patients with prolapse have a ratio of one specific receptor type, ER-alpha, to another, ER-beta, that is 2.7 times higher than healthy controls.
So the walkie-talkies are tuned to the wrong frequencies.
Precisely. When that ratio is thrown off by nearly 3 times the normal amount, the cells physically cannot read the estrogen signals correctly.
Even if the hormone is there.
Even if some estrogen manages to reach the tissue, the cells misinterpret the command. Instead of synthesizing new collagen, they are signaled to produce more of those matrix-degrading enzymes, the molecular scissors we talked about earlier.
Okay, let me put this all together with the construction analogy from earlier. Estrogen isn't just a raw material, it's the project manager on the construction site.
Right.
And if the project manager is missing because of the prolactin spike or the workers on site, those estrogen receptors, have broken walkie-talkies and aren't listening to them, the demolition crew just keeps knocking down walls.
The scissors keep snipping. They never get the memo to switch over to rebuilding.
The demolition crew keeps working, and the builders never show up.
So if the cellular project manager is missing, what happens to the actual physical structure of the pelvic floor? This has to explain the physical fallout, the symptoms that millions of women experience but are often too embarrassed to talk about openly.
It explains the symptoms perfectly. Without proper collagen synthesis, the physical structure simply cannot hold its shape or tension under pressure. The clinical data reveals that up to 58% of new mothers experience vaginal laxity.
58%, that is huge.
It is. And stress urinary incontinence, which is leaking when you cough, laugh, sneeze, or exercise, is directly linked to these reduced collagen levels. The
Right.
tissues just do not have the tensile strength they had before the pregnancy.
And it becomes even more critical when we look at actual tearing. The sources mention severe injuries, specifically obstetric anal sphincter injuries, or OASIS.
Yeah, for severe tears like OASIS, wound healing is significantly delayed without adequate estrogen. Estrogen is required for epithelialization.
Let's define that for the listener. What is epithelialization in, plain terms?
It is the process of skin cells actively crawling across a wound bed to bridge the gap and seal it shut. It's like a living Band-Aid forming over the tear.
Okay, I can picture that.
So estrogen commands those cells to move and form strong, organized collagen fibers underneath. Without it, the body is basically trying to tape a box shut without any adhesive. The wound heals much slower, and the resulting tissue is structurally weaker.
Which brings up a massive point of confusion for a lot of people.
Yeah.
The standard medical advice you hear everywhere postpartum is just do your Kegels, pelvic floor muscle training or PFMT.
Right.
And looking at the guidelines, PFMT is absolutely the first line care. It improves muscle tone, usually over a 6 to 16-week period.
Building muscle strength is crucial. The guidelines are definitely correct in prioritizing it.
But wait, if I'm doing Kegels religiously to strengthen the muscle, but my underlying fascia and collagen are still stretched, depleted, and compromised because of the hormone drop, doesn't that mean we're only treating half the problem?
You are entirely correct. The sources validate that concern. We are very often only treating half the problem. Imagine the pelvic floor as a suspension bridge.
Oh, well.
The muscles are the concrete pillars, but the connective tissue, the fascia and collagen, are the steel cables holding the roadway up. Kegels can reinforce the concrete pillars, but no amount of flexing those pillars can magically rebuild overstretched, collagen-depleted steel cables. Muscle training cannot synthesize collagen.
So if Kegels only solve the muscle half of the problem, we have to look at the toolkit for repairing the other half. How do we fix the actual collagen and estrogen deficit? What do the sources outline for getting those steel cables back in shape?
They outline a few distinct approaches, starting with foundational nutrition. Your body needs the raw materials to build collagen.
Right, makes sense.
Hydrolyzed collagen supplements, specifically types I and II, are heavily highlighted in the nutritional data. Taking about 10 grams daily provides the essential amino acids needed to support skin, joint, and pelvic stability.
But the sources also mention taking vitamin C alongside it. Why is that specific combination so important?
Because vitamin C acts as a mandatory cofactor. Think of the collagen supplement as delivering the bricks to the site, but vitamin C is the mortar. Without adequate vitamin C, your body physically cannot cross-link the collagen fibers to make them strong and stable. The bricks just sit there.
Okay, so that handles the raw materials. But as we established, having the bricks doesn't matter if the project manager is missing.
Right.
So how do we address the hormonal deficit while a mother is still lactating and dealing with high prolactin?
This is where local vaginal estrogen becomes a really powerful tool. It is available as creams, small tablets, or rings, and the clinical efficacy is very high.
And it's local.
Yes, the operative word here is local. It acts directly on the vaginal and pelvic tissues to replace that missing architect. Once applied, it suppresses the destructive MMPs, promotes collagen synthesis, and physically thickens the vaginal wall.
But the immediate worry any new parent will have is safety, right? Does applying an estrogen cream mean the hormone is getting into the bloodstream and affecting breast milk production or systemic health?
That is the genius of localized treatment. The sources show that local vaginal estrogen works directly on the tissue receptors without significantly elevating systemic blood levels of the hormone.
Oh, that's amazing.
It stays local. This makes it an incredibly safe option, even for promoting wound healing in severe oasis tears, because it bypasses the prolactin suppression in the bloodstream entirely. It doesn't interfere with lactation.
That is a huge relief and really encouraging.
Yeah.
But as I kept reading through our stack of research for this deep dive, I hit a section that was honestly jarring.
Ah, the devices.
Yes. We have to talk about the controversial tech, specifically energy devices like CO2 lasers and radiofrequency treatments used for vaginal rejuvenation. Because the source material presents a massive, almost unbelievable contradiction.
It is arguably the most hotly debated area in pelvic health right now. And it is vital that we look at both sides of this data impartially because the divide is severe.
Very severe.
On one hand, there are clinical studies in our sources claiming that fractional CO2 lasers yield incredible, rapid results. One specific study reported that these lasers stimulate the production of new type 3 collagen and new blood vessels in as little as 1 hour after a single treatment.
Which is wild. How does shooting a laser into tissue actually force it to make collagen?
The underlying theory relies on controlled microdamage. The laser intentionally burns tiny microscopic holes in the tissue.
Sounds painful.
Well, this trauma forces the body to mount a massive localized healing response. It essentially tricks the body into rushing all those inflammatory first responders and repair signals back to the site to rebuild the tissue stronger than before.
Which sounds like a futuristic quick fix. But then you turn the page in the research, and multiple other sources classify these exact same energy devices as entirely investigational, with incredibly severe warnings attached.
Right. Major regulatory bodies are sounding the alarm.
Yeah. NCE, the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence in the UK, they've explicitly not approved them for routine use. And the FDA, the US, issued warnings regarding serious risks of burns, permanent scarring, and chronic pain.
And it goes even further.
Right. Perhaps most drastically, the sources note that in 2025, Australia literally canceled all regulatory approvals for vaginal rejuvenation devices entirely.
The contrast is genuinely stark. You have certain clinical sectors heavily promoting these devices as a regenerative breakthrough for collagen repair, while major global regulatory bodies are clamping down hard, citing severe safety and efficacy concerns.
So we have one medical camp claiming lasers are a 1-hour fix for collagen depletion, and another major regulatory camp literally banning them from the market in 2025. For a listener trying to navigate their own treatment and figure out what is safe, that is a massive, terrifying divide.
It is an incredibly difficult landscape for patients to navigate. And frankly, it underscores exactly why understanding the underlying biology, the hormones, the receptors, the mechanics of collagen is so vital.
Exactly.
When you actually understand how your tissue repairs itself on a cellular level, you aren't just relying on marketing. You can have a much more informed, critical conversation with your doctor about whether a specific treatment is scientifically sound or potentially carrying hidden risks.
And that's why this matters. Whether you are postpartum right now, whether you are supporting someone who is, or you are just endlessly curious about the hidden mechanics of the human body, understanding this science changes everything.
It entirely reframes the concept of recovery, realizing that there is a biologically mandated 6 to 12-month cellular rebuilding phase completely shatters the myth of a quick bounce back.
Because feeling different, feeling loose, experiencing discomfort months after birth, it is not in your head. It is a highly documented biological, hormonal, and structural reality. You physically cannot just bounce back when your cells are actively being starved of the very hormones they need to rebuild the foundation.
And looking at the cellular reality raises an incredible question for the future of treatment.
Oh, yes.
Science is always evolving, and there is one final study in our sources that points to a completely different frontier for postpartum recovery.
The polyisocyanide hydrogel study. We have to leave the listener with this because it blew my mind and it completely flips everything we just talked about on its head.
It is a brilliant glimpse into the future. Researchers are currently looking at how physical tension, just the sheer mechanical stiffness of an environment, affects cell behavior.
Okay, so tension alone.
Yes, they discovered that mechanical stiffness heavily dictates how vaginal fibroblasts, which are the specific cells that manufacture collagen, behave and repair.
To make sure I have this right, the cells can actually feel how stiff or loose their environment is, and they change their behavior based on that feeling alone.
Yes, exactly. It relies on the concept of cellular mechanosensing. Think of a cell like a spider sitting on a web. It can feel the tension of the threads.
Okay.
If the web is loose and sagging, the spider reacts differently than if the web is pulled taut. The cells in the pelvic floor do the exact same thing. They sense the mechanical tension around them.
So if mechanical stiffness alone can change how these collagen-building cells act, could the future of postpartum recovery move away from hormones entirely?
It is very possible.
I mean, imagine a future where doctors could insert highly specific biomimicking physical scaffolds into the pelvic floor.
Scaffolds made of advanced cholecystocyanide hydrogels that are engineered to perfectly mimic the exact stiffness and tension of healthy pre-pregnancy tissue.
These scaffolds could literally trick the body's cells into thinking they are already in a healthy, high estrogen environment.
Just by changing the physical tension of the tissue.
Just by tightening the web, you could force the cells to wake up, fire the demolition crew, and start rebuilding the collagen on their own. No systemic hormones required.
It is the absolute cutting edge of regenerative medicine, bypassing the chemical signals entirely and using physical tension to command the cells to heal.
It is incredible because at the end of the day, you can't just snap a rubber band back into place if the rubber itself has fundamentally changed its molecular structure. The postpartum body is doing something far more impressive than bouncing back. It is carefully, painstakingly rebuilding the foundation of the house, waiting for the supply chain to open back up, and eventually settling into a structure that is entirely beautifully new.